This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Craig Johnson. Now, Craig is the New York Times bestselling author of the Longmire Mysteries, the basis for the hit Netflix original series Longmire. He's the recipient of the Western Writers of America Spur Award for Fiction and the Mountain and Plains Independent Booksellers Association's Reading the West Book Award for Fiction. He lives in Ucross, Wyoming, population 26, and joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his career and latest book, The Longmire Defense. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Craig.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Craig, I'm happy to have you here. I love the hat. And I have to
They're all
ask,
the rage here in Wyoming.
I'm sure. Where does your story as an author begin?
Where does my story as an author begin? Like that boy. I don't know. I guess, the thing is, I came from a family of storytellers, and very rapidly at a very young age came to the conclusion that I was the worst storyteller in my family like that. And I thought, you know what, maybe if I try a different, angle of attack on this, maybe it would be better like that. And so I started thinking about trying to write like that. But, of course, the difficulty with trying to be a writer is it's like trying to be an astronaut. I mean, the odds against you are so great that you're just better off not telling anybody about it. And then maybe if it happens, it'll appear like it was a miracle, overnight success, that type of thing like that. And so, I got an education like that, now some of it in writing. But I mean, you really have to find something to write about, something you feel strongly enough, that you can, get on that horse and ride, for the better part of a year or at least, for any kind of a novel. And, I don't know. I mean, I guess at that point in time, I guess it was like, a little over 20 years ago, everything in crime fiction was very noir oriented. It was all very urban, gritty, alcoholic divorce detectives burying bodies in their backyards and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I don't know a lot of people in law enforcement, but I know some and they aren't like that, and I thought maybe if you go in a different direction like it, and I thought, well, what if you did the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America? That would certainly be something different than, what everybody seems to be doing nowadays. And that, lo and behold, was how Walt Longmire, the sheriff of Absaroka County, was born.
There you go. Where did you grow up?
A little bit of everywhere like that. I was born in West Virginia like that, but I had family scattered all through Kansas and New Mexico and up in Montana and everywhere. And so I was always kind of headed west under all occasions like that. And, my grandfather had built his place and my father had built his place. And so I knew I wanted to build my place like that. And so where I'm speaking to you from is actually the ranch that I built myself like that, because in my family, you were pretty much slave labor until you ran away and went to college like that. And so I learned how to do, basic carpentry like that, masonry and plumbing and electricity and all of that. And my father's statement about that was, you may not ever use this stuff, but at least if you have to hire somebody to do it, you'll at least know what they're doing and what you're paying for. And so that was probably, I don't know, two things like that. It slowed me down and kept me from getting started as a writer because I built the ranch, myself like that. And then went out and my wife had a store she wanted to start up in a little town called Sheridan, about 30 miles away. And there was an old opera house. And I went in and tore it all out and redid it so she could get her store going like that. So it may have slowed me down a little bit from getting my writing career going. But then again, I also many times say that it was one of the best things that could have ever possibly happened because it taught me some patience. It kind of taught me that, most things that are worth doing may not, pan out in a long weekend. It may take a little bit more work than that and a little more time than that. And I think that, when you're going to try and accomplish something like a long form novel or certainly a series of novels, which I wasn't sure that I was going to write a series, but that's how it turned out. Like that, then you need to have a little bit of patience, like it, and take your time and try and do it right.
So does the adage, from carpentry, measure twice, cut once, apply to writing?
Absolutely. And then, even better than that, the Wyoming version is drink another beer, cut a little straighter. So always different versions to that like that. But no, I think absolutely like that. I think, I'm a big one for, I mean, I've heard it said numerous times before, like that there are two different kinds of writers. There are those who do the outlines, and then there are those who just like kind of fly by the seat of their pants. It would worry me greatly to try and write a novel without a good, strong sense of outline and what the message was that I was trying to get across, and a cast of characters and all those type of things. I like to have all that work, kind of down, before I sit down and start writing. That doesn't mean that I won't, escape from that. It doesn't mean that outline that I have is, completely inflexible. I mean, I think you have to be open to the improvisational aspects of being a writer too, and realize that it's not just a goal of a location, an ending, like that. It's also, the trip itself, like at the voyage itself, you'll learn an awful lot about that novel while you're writing it. And if you're going to ignore, what you're going to learn by writing that novel, you've kind of missed out on the whole thing. It's kind of like going on a trip and staring at the odometer the whole time.
Right. Well, that's part of the fun of writing is you getting yourself immersed in the story, enjoying the story, uncovering the story. And I think that comes through for readers as well. Like if you're having fun while you're writing it, and if you're following your own curiosity as you're writing it, they're going to do the same thing as they're reading it.
I hope so. I mean, you hope that that's the case, like that, which is, the big thing. I mean, you really need to come with the whole package, whenever it is that you're putting a novel out there, and thinking about those readers and what it is that number one, I'm always telling students whenever I'm doing workshops, like, well, what's your message? What are you trying to say, with this, and so many novelists start off, especially young ones, where they don't have a plan. They really don't have an idea of what the message is, like, which is okay, I guess. I mean, if you're going to search for that message while you're trying to write the book, that's fine like that. But, boy, that's really kind of taking some chances of going down some dead end roads, that may not do what it is that you want them to do. And so I'm always like thinking to myself, it's more analogies like that, saying, it'd be like if you and I, were to jump in my truck out here and say, okay, we're going to take off. We're going to drive to Baltimore, but we're not going to take a map. I would look at you and I would say, hey, we don't have to look at it, but let's go ahead and just throw a map in the glove box there, just so we got it in case something happens along the way there.
So did you debut your writing career with a Longmire novel, or did you have something else first?
No. The first Longmire novel, Cold Dish, was the very first novel that I wrote. And I don't know. I mean, it's a story of rejuvenation. I think, where we've got this character, Walt Longmire. He's a little different from a lot of the protagonists that you see in crime fiction, in the sense that, his wife's, passed away about 5 years ago, like that. And he's kind of wallowing like that in this sadness, that he's built for himself, and wondering, if he's doing what it is that he should be doing for a living. And, is he really making any difference in the world? I mean, these are all like universal questions that I think a lot of us start asking ourselves, at a certain age. You get to a certain point where you might become a little bit world weary. And then that for me is when a character becomes interesting, when it becomes a little bit introspective. And, with Walt, like that, it became a voice. I mean, that's the other thing I think that was just so essential to the process, and one of the main reasons why I think the first book and subsequently the entire series, and even the television show that got made from the books, look at a lot of it came from having a unique voice, a different way of telling a story. And the way I always explain that is my wife is sitting across the kitchen table here from me, and the most feared words, are when she's reading my work back to me, which I always tell all students, have somebody else read your work back to you, because you'll hear every mistake that you can make. The most feared words or phrase that we have around the ranch here is there another way to say this? And what that boils down to, the example I always use is the red hot gun barrel swung around under the looming mountains. Well, the gun barrel is always red hot. The mountains are always looming like it. And so I always tell students, if you write something and it sounds like something that you've read before, guess what? You have. Throw it out, do something different. That's not your job, to put people asleep when they're reading your stuff. You want them staying up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning reading your stuff, because it's got the synapse in their brains firing like that, and the imagination and the imagery all working for them like that. And so it's a constant battle to not become a lazy writer, I think, but it's truly worthwhile if you can get there.
So what have you learned about yourself over the, from that first book, that first publication all the way through, I guess this is number 19 right now. Did you walk away from this experience? Any big life lessons, about yourself?
Oh, about myself. God, everything. I mean, there's no way that you can start off, on a voyage of that type and not have some kind of introspection log about who exactly you are and what you do and how you do it. I think that that's part of a lot of it like that. But then again, it's also, discovering, what kind of an effect that type of thing can have on your life. And I can't imagine a life without writing now. I really can't. I mean, I did a lot of different things. I did a lot of different jobs in a lot of different places, lived a lot of different places, doing a lot of different things. But to go back to any of that, and give up writing, I don't think that I could do it. I mean, it would literally, I think, spiritually kill me to have to give that up, and I don't know if I suspected, that it would be that powerful whenever it was that I started. But, anything that you do, like 8 hours a day, 6 days a week and cheat on Sundays, like that has got to be something that's pretty compelling, in your life like that. And, if it's not going to be compelling to me to write the books, I wouldn't think that it would be compelling for anybody to read them. So the two kind of go hand in hand.
Well, what can you share with us about the Longmire Defense?
Well, I mean, it's always a challenge, whenever you're writing a series of books. Whenever I still remember Catherine Court, the president of Penguin USA, sitting me aside after they had purchased the cold dish and saying, "We really like these characters. We really like this place. We think that you should consider, possibly doing this as a series." And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA and going, "Yeah, I don't think that's a really good idea. I don't think that'll work. But, I got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you and see what you say." And her response to me was, "Why don't you go back to your ranch in Wyoming and sit down and think about this?" And I came back and one of the things that, my wife said to me, she said, "Do you remember what it was like when you finished that book?" And I said, "No, what?" And she goes, "You were in the throes of the most devastating depression I've ever seen you in my life." And I started thinking back about it, and she was right. I mean, it was like a mass death. I had all of these characters in this world that I had created, and spent so much time, trying to put together to make a novel with like that. And then suddenly they were gone. And so then to sit back and think, okay, well, maybe this is something I could continue doing. And so I kind of made a deal with the devil. I kind of made a deal with Viking Penguin and said, "Okay, look, here's the deal. I'll do 4 of these. Okay. I'll do 4 of these novels." And basically what I did was I had a buddy of mine by the name, you might know the name, fellow by the name of Tony Hillerman. And I had dinner with Tony and I asked him about it. I said, "How do you do this, Tony?" I mean, he was on his 15th or 16th book when I was discussing it with him. And he said, "Well, just sound like a bad sports analogy. You got to play them up one at a time is what you got to do." He said, "But also it kind of helps if you can find some kind of a framework to give yourself, a different kind of environment for each book so that each book is not exactly the same every single time." I mean, some readers may want that, but they don't really want that because, it become repetitious and formulaic. And so you have to be able to find a way to make those things different. And so one of the things I decided was, what if I did what I refer to as the Vivaldi, pull of Vivaldi like that? And what that is it goes through 4 seasons. And so it takes me, 4 books, it's like the 4 seasons. It takes me 4 books to get through one literary year for Walt Longmire. And there were a couple of benefits to that. First of all, it gave me completely different environs for each book because July in Wyoming is nothing like January in Wyoming. And so it's a completely different environment every time. The other thing it did is it kind of slowed the aging process for my protagonist, Walt Longmire, who's a Vietnam veteran. And so 20 years ago, I started writing these books. Well, now I'm 20 years older, but Walt, on the other hand, is only 5 years older than when we first met him. And so that's really kind of handy, actually, when you're looking at the long-term arc, of a series of books like that. And as far as the Longmire Defense is concerned, then it's a question of trying to find different storylines, and different plots. And finding different ways to tell these stories. Well, a couple of different things you take into consideration. First is okay, what time of year does this story happen? I've had books that I've had to hold off for 3 years to write simply because it wasn't the right season for that book. Second of all, what's the message of this book? What is it you're trying to get across? What kind of an effect is it going to have on these characters and developing them and evolving them? Because I'm a firm believer that if you have a series of books, that the lifeblood of a series of books is how you develop those characters and allow them to grow and evolve, just like all of us do every day. If you don't, then you're going to get pretty static pretty quick. And I think that's a dangerous process. And so for this one, for the Longmire Defense, I did one of the things I really like doing, which is circling back around and finding either a relationship or an instance or something from Walt's past that I can pull back out and utilize as, a case for him to work with now. And what happens, of course, is he's in the search and rescue and happens to be up in the Bighorn Mountains here, 14,000 foot mountains right up here, to the west of us. And he's stopped in this one spot where he's trying to find this woman and looks around and realizes that he's been in this spot before and remembers that it was a conversation that he had with his father when he was very young. His father told him, "Have I ever told you about the first time I ever saw a man die?" And he tells him the whole story about how that, they'd been at an elk camp in the late 1940s. And this individual, Bill Sutherland, who was the accountant for the state of Wyoming, was shot. And they don't know if it was on purpose or on accident because there was no one carrying the caliber of rifle that did the killing. And so it was kind of an open-ended cold case that never found any kind of resolution or anything. Well, as Walt's standing there, and his dog is digging around in the rocks and looks down and sees the dog, he says, "Get away from there before a marmot comes out and bites your nose off." The dog raises its head up and it's got a leather strap hanging out of its mouth. Well, it could be a piece of horse tag or it could be a rifle sling. And so Walt goes down underneath the rocks there, reaches his arm down and pulls out this Weatherby H&H 300 H&H Magnum, which is the exact caliber that killed Bill Sutherland back in 1948. And I like to think of Walt as being a very even-handed and fair detective, who's a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty, until he discovers that this rifle belonged to his grandfather, Lloyd Longmire. And his relationship with his grandfather all the way through the books, as we've learned from the few excerpts that we've had from his childhood, was not an easy one. The two didn't get along. And so for the first time, Walt's actually kind of rooting for this person to actually have done this killing. It's kind of an interesting journey for him, not only professionally, but also personally.
A few things I love about this story. First of all, the notion of a father and son with a conversation starting, "Did I ever tell you about the first time I saw a man die?" is fantastic. And it's taking me to a Johnny Cash song.
But get that worked up for me, would you?
That's right. Yeah. I'll go to ChatGPT and have it write in the style of Johnny Cash. But the other thing is, just going back in time, 19 or so years when you're talking to, the head of Penguin Random House, and you're almost a first time author, right? They're trying to buy a book. They're offering you an annuity, basically, to say write a series of books, and you're like, "Yeah, I don't know about that." It's a little just don't know, but we don't know what we don't know at that time. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And the thing for me, of course, I wrote one book. It didn't necessarily mean I could write another one, for goodness sake. And ask anybody who's, ever done it. I mean, generally the response is usually, "Oh boy, that second book, that's the one that's the hardest," because the Cold Dish, I worked on it for 10 years, they weren't going to wait 10 years for book number 2. They needed it in 6 months, so that's a whole new breed of cat like that. And so, you got to look at those kind of things and just think to yourself, okay, am I capable of doing that? And fortunately, I was. As a matter of fact, I talked to a lot of my literary author friends, who put 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years between books. And I'm always ready to grab them by the front of their lapels and shake them and say, "What are you doing for 9 years? Anyway, write the damn book." And so, but I mean, for me, it worked out really, really well like that because I'm a blue collar guy. And I jump up first thing in the morning and I have a couple of, pots of coffee and I am off and running, trying to get that book, get it down on paper like that because, those ideas are so fleeting like that, and those moments, where you have those sparks where the book is all kind of falling into place and everything. I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. And so thank goodness I've got a book to do every year because if I could dawdle around and play with it, for 5, 6 years or something like that, I'd be out walking the streets of Ucross, population 26. And that's a grim prospect, I got to tell you.
What is the secret? How do you go from taking 10 years to write book 1 and then having 6 months for book 2? I mean, I'm sure you learn a lot. The learning curve is very steep, but it's still a significant amount of time to cut down.
Well, it is, but I mean, also you have to look at it practically and say somebody was finally willing to pay me, to do it for goodness sake. Because when you're writing that first book, man, that is the loneliest work in the world. You don't have an agent, you don't have a publisher, you don't have anything like that, and you're just out there swimming in the ocean without a life preserver, and at least, when you get that first book contract, I think your confidence level goes, way up like that, because you realize, somebody's actually willing to take a chance on this, like to a pretty incredible financial degree, they're willing to take a chance on this. And so it gives you a little bit more confidence, I think, to jump in and try and write that second book. Okay. And then once again, whenever it's a series, it's not like you're exactly reinventing the wheel. I mean, you've got all of those characters, that you get to bring back, and that world that you bring back. And one piece of information that I held back here and didn't tell you like that, which probably I should at this point in the question, was the first draft of The Cold Dish was about 650 pages long. It was like War and Peace in Absaroka County was what it was like. And so, I thought, the first thing the agent said to me, Gail Hockman of Brand Hockman Associates, wonderful, wonderful woman like that. And her first statement to me was, you're going to have to cut about 250 pages out of this thing, before they're going to even consider publishing it. And I was like, okay. And she said, well, do you want me to go through? And I was like, nope. I gave birth to it. I'll lop its arms and legs off. I'll be the one to, try and see if I can, get it underneath that, that 400 page, mark. And it really made a big difference. It really made a big difference, making a more streamlined, readable novel. I mean, I learned a lot, cutting those 250 pages out of that first book, but that was 250 pages of material. A lot of it backstories, a lot of it like scenes that really didn't have a place in this particular novel, but possibly had the potential for future novels. And so the material was always there, like in the back of my head. It's not, I don't think I'm giving away anything by saying that the majority of the characters that are in my books are based off of people I know. I mean, my favorite quote about writing is the one from Wallace Stegner on writing and teaching fiction, where he says, the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off of anybody alive or dead. What a crock that is, because that's your job, to go find interesting people and populate your novels with them. And that kind of made the job a lot easier, but it also gave me wonderful backstories and relationships with all of those characters, to consider going on and moving forward with those characters too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's it like, having, this series turned into something for the screen, and how involved, are you or were you with that?
The only way I can describe it is it's like coming down one morning to have breakfast and on the kitchen table is a house plant, and having it start talking to you in the first thing in the morning. It's really strange, really weird, kind of disembodied, but kind of wonderful too. And so, it's interesting. My experience was actually pretty positive. I mean, I talked to a lot of other authors who had had pieces done like that, either in films or television series or those type of things. And they, they had varying responses about it. And most of them said, look, they're going to write you a check, and then that's it. You're never going to hear from them again. And you may recognize what you see on the screen, or you may not, and good luck with that, is basically what they told me. We had some pretty amazing producers and showrunners who really loved the books, and really kind of wanted to capture a lot of what had been encapsulated in the book. Even if it was on a smaller scale, like with a 42-minute teleplay. I mean, one of the first meetings that I had with them, they said, your books don't break down into a 42-page teleplay very easily. And my response to that was, well, thank God you shouldn't be reading them if they did like that. And so, we had a really good working relationship like that. And even to the point where they actually sent me the auditions of the DVDs for the actors that they were considering, and made me a creative consultant on the show, and actually sent me the scripts. They invited me to come down to Los Angeles and be in the writer's room. And I thought, what the hell? Why, not only for me like that, but also who was the last person that the TV writers are going to want in that room arguing with them about minutia, about Absaroka County, for goodness sake. This let them take the bits and pieces that they want from the books and then utilize them to do what it is that they do and do it the best that they can. Because, TV and movies is like any other business, like ranching. What do? You go out and you get the very best people that you can, and then you do the hardest thing in the world. Leave them alone. Let them do what it is that they do. That's why you hired them, for goodness sake. And I have to admit that, my experiences were pretty wonderful. I mean, the show ran, 3 years on A&E. Then A&E tried to buy it. Warner Brothers wouldn't sell it. It got picked up by Netflix, ran another 3 years. And then Netflix tried to buy it from Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers still wouldn't sell it. And I think that sweetheart deal that they had, I think they thought, well, we've got this little cowboy Indian show, it'll go for a couple of years and then we'll just cancel it, and stop, producing it. Well, here we are 6 years later, and it's still one of the top 10 to 20 shows on Netflix every other week. And so it seems to have some staying power, the same as the novels, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a unique experience. I do talk to so many writers, whether it's, a movie, big screen adaptation or small screen, they don't look at it as positively, but that's not your experience. So that's great. One of the ways I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is through pop culture. So I'm curious, when you were growing up, did you have any favorite things that you like to watch on TV?
Wow. I have to admit, that they were probably Westerns, I have to admit. Like that. I mean, I really enjoyed, things like The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, Wanted Dead or Alive, The Wild Wild West, all of those like that were favorites like that. And, so, I mean, I guess I was always kind of like Western oriented like that. But then again, to me, these were Westerns that had like a little bit more of a psychological bent to them. One of my absolute favorites is The Westerner with Brian Keith that was actually produced and written by Sam Peckinpah. And these were Westerns that had just a little bit more psychological depth to them than the regular shoot 'em ups. That's kind of what I was trying to accomplish, I guess, with the Cold Dish, like with the Longmire books too. I mean, whenever I do a lot of talks like it, and sometimes I'll be talking to the Western writers of America, and I'll be looking at all those people sitting out there. And the first thing I say to them is, hey guys, let's not just copy Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour, because Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour were pretty good at writing Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour. So maybe try and go in another direction to do something a little bit different like that. And so, whenever the TV show started 12 years ago, and of course the books, almost 20 years ago, there weren't that many contemporary Westerns, being done. And, to take the modern, epic, romantic American West, and then do it in the modern day, was something I thought might be a little bit different and might be a little bit more interesting than the usual stuff, it seemed like.
Yeah. My father was a big fan of Westerns. I remember he just turned 91 yesterday.
Congratulations. Tell him I said hello.
I sure will.
Find out what his secret is.
Yeah, apparently it's golf and Chardonnay.
Wow. Okay, I got it.
But I remember he would take me and my twin brother to Westerns, like the newer ones that would come out in like the 80s. Like I remember like Silverado was a big one, which actually is probably one of my favorite movies. I think that one's great. And what was the one that came out with Clint Eastwood is one of his last Westerns.
Undefeated? Okay.
Undefeated. Undefeated? Yeah, something like that. Close to that. But that was those are great. Gene Hackman, I think, was in that one too.
Oh gosh, yes. And then then you can go back look at in the films like that have been made also. I mean, just last night I was watching Pocket Money, with Paul Newman like that, and it's a great little Western like that that's modern day like that deals a lot with the contemporary American West, and. And then, then just, it's always a question of trying to get a different angle, on it, I think. Like that. I mean, everybody loves to say, oh, the Western is dead. The Western's dead. That's the end of it. There are no more, Westerns. There's no reason, to do Westerns anymore like that. And in all actuality, it's a genre that lends itself, to a broad aspect of storytelling. And the moral aspect of it is, so strong, as far as like good versus evil. What is good? What is evil, what's good, what's bad, all of these things like it. And how do these things, create a dramatic conflict within themselves like that, which I think is, kind of essential, like I think to the whole process of the writing.
Yeah. How about music? What did you like to listen to growing up?
Oh gosh, everything. I'm a big jazz guy in all actuality. I love jazz. I love the blues like that. But then again, I also listen to country music. I also listen to rock and roll, like that classical music, a little bit of everything. I mean, I understand that there are a lot of writers who don't listen to music when they work and because they find it distracting like that. But I find it to be an extraordinarily emotive medium.
Yeah.
One of the things I have happened is I've got a friend who's a member of the Motion Picture Academy, and they send them the soundtracks, to all the movies. Like, well, I really don't see that many movies. And so she sends me all the soundtracks to the movies. And so I have this catalog of all this incredibly emotive music, that I don't have any imagery to go along with. And it's kind of handy as far as just popping some of those CDs in and just playing them and seeing what you can come up with.
Yeah, I like having classical music on in the background, something without lyrics, to kind of stimulate, my brain. I think there is like a little creative stimulation that happens when you've got music on, but anything with lyrics, I'll get distracted with. And
I think you start singing along, and nobody pays me to do that. I don't know about you.
Oh God, they pay me to stop.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite place where you like to write?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, yes. Whenever you start out, you always have, you kind of, you tend to be like a little precious, as far as where it is you work, and I've got a desk up there in my loft, with a stool that I sit on and a window that I look out of, and all of my important things there, with all my books and research books and all of that on the desk, and that's my favorite place to work like that. But what you discover, kind of going back to one of your earlier questions there, that they don't take into, may not take into consideration whenever you're writing that, okay, if you do get a book contract and you have this other book that you have to get done, okay, you've got a book tour you've got to go out on. You've got library events and literary festivals that you do all year long. And if you're fortunate enough to get your books translated into other languages, you may be fortunate enough that you've also got other countries that want you to come and do tours over there too, like that. And pretty soon, your time gets, kind of tight as far as that kind of thing is concerned. And so that preciousness kind of goes away. You'll find yourself sitting in French train stations, just writing away, no problem at all, like that. Or, in Tucson, like that, waiting to go out, and do the book festival like that as you're sitting in the hotel room like that, and you will write just fine, by golly.
And then if I'd like to call this the Dear Younger Me question, we started off, but you were talking about how, you came from a family of storytellers and you may not have been the most renowned storyteller when you were younger anyway. What would you, if you could write a letter to your younger self, what would you tell them? What kind of words of advice would you give your younger self about, what your life is going to be like and about writing?
I've been asked that question before, and the only thing that I can tell myself would be calm down. Calm down. It's all going to work out. It's all going to be okay. You don't have to be quite so anxious, about, whether or not you're going to succeed or not. Just focus on the work, and focus on the writing and all of that like that. But then I think to myself, what? Part of that raw energy that you have, part of that, dissatisfaction that you have that drives you so strong, when you're young, boy, that might be one of the main reasons why it is that you end up, being where you are and doing what you're doing. And so maybe the advice that I would have for myself is not a damn thing. I wouldn't say it to myself. I'd say, you're on your own. Take care of it from here, would you?
That works. Yeah. Cause you may not have gotten to where you were if you had some guy come and say, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Right.
I'm sure you wouldn't mind if they gave you the winning lottery numbers, but that's
well, yeah, that would be a different story like that. But then I could have also ended up digging ditches for a living or breaking horses. I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out. So maybe I would just keep my mouth shut.
There it is. Keep the trap shut. Craig Johnson, this has been a fun conversation. I imagine people can buy the Longmire Defense wherever books are sold.
It will be out on September 5th. It'll be at all fine book purveyors everywhere, I'm sure.
And I'm sure some not fine book purveyors.
Absolutely. And I'll probably be visiting those. I've got a tour coming up. It's about 26 cities. And so, I know it's kind of, a lot of touring is kind of fallen into disfavor, not only with authors like that, but also with publishers. But thank goodness, Viking Penguin, Random House, they're still pushing me to get out there on the road like that. And the wonderful thing is that we actually sell books when I'm out on the road. If I was to be out on the road and book sales would go down, then you probably wouldn't see me so much anymore like that. But we've been extraordinarily fortunate and looking forward to being out on the road again.
Well, safe travels on that book tour. If you want to learn more about Craig Johnson. Craig, do you have a website you can share with the audience?
I do. It's at CraigAllenJohnson.com, CraigAllenJohnson.com. And the only reason my middle name is there is because there's a realtor in Minnesota that won't give up CraigJohnson.com. So CraigAllenJohnson.com.
There it is. Well, I will put that in our show notes, Craig, so everybody listening can just tap on that and look it up easy enough. Craig, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here, and thank you for letting me be here.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.